Hi guys, today we'll be talking about 1941, a rare miss for Steven Spielberg, a movie that is known as a bit of a box office bomb, even though it actually made its money back. It made, I think, a little over double its budget, so I think once you take into account advertising and everything, I think overall it probably made a small profit and was marginally successful as far as audiences and critics. One that I think holds a fairly middle-of-the-road rating on something like Rotten Tomatoes. One that's just not super fondly remembered, but is a bit of a cult hit. I don't think it has quite enough of an audience to really hold that status, but enough to where there are some people that genuinely enjoy this movie, and it's not the complete flop I think a lot of people remember it as. I think it's just in comparison to the success of Spielberg, especially around that time, that it feels like more of a flop than it actually is. But again, I do say that it is fairly disappointing. It is a bit of a miss. It has a lot of good aspects to it, but the complete package just doesn't quite come together. The sound design is fantastic and has a John Williams score. Again, not one of his best either, but enough to where I don't really have any major complaints in that department. It's good enough for what it is, works fairly well, and it definitely is a good-looking film. And this deluxe letterbox edition, LaserDisc, doesn't betray that. It really holds up very well and keeps that, probably what I consider to be one of the best elements, looking great on LaserDisc. The special effects look great. A lot of the action shots are wonderful. It's a really good-looking period piece. The problem is, though, a lot of the award-winning special effects, a lot of the great visual presentation, it really takes over from the comedy elements. And this is a comedy that I feel like was shooting for being a Spielberg-esque movie that's kind of in the style of Dr. Strangelove. He took Dr. Strangelove and made that type of war movie comedy, basing it around more of a Spielberg style. It felt like that's what I was trying to go for, and it couldn't quite get it. 1941 it takes place in 1941, obviously, and is about Southern California, particularly Los Angeles, Hollywood region, reacting to the possible invasion by the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. This was a very real fear, especially along the West Coast, and it sort of like hilarity ensues because of the way different people react to a situation. Homeowners that are along the coast trying to set themselves up ready, the army being very anxious and very trigger happy, and it really pulls all those elements together. But it's almost like lots of little storylines and character groupings that don't quite mesh together as much as I wish they would have. I feel like there's all these different characters and story elements and groups of people that their stories are intertwined to different degrees depending how you're looking at, but not in a way that really made me care enough about the characters. And when the visuals overtake the comedy and when the characters just really weren't quite grabbing me, it really just relies on the actual comedic moments being fantastic for this to work, and I don't think they do. There are large chunks of this that I felt were just honestly weren't even very entertaining, let alone hilarious. There are long stretches of this. I'm just like, this is okay, and then you get a few moments here or there, and I think that's what really kills it for me is the hit and miss. There are some segments that are laugh out loud hilarious, and then other ones that just don't work, and then you get another one later on that maybe the special effects are really great and the action's really great, but the humor falls flat, and other ones where the humor's okay, and it's just kind of this, it doesn't really mesh together very well, and it's so hit or miss sequence by sequence. One of my favorite sequences is there's about halfway through the movie a really great dance number, and moves into a giant fight on the dance floor, and it all comes together, it all works really well, very impressively shot and impressively choreographed. And that goes along with stuff like some of the aerial combat and things with John Belushi's character. That all works fairly well, but it's just individual segments that work well throughout a much larger picture. It's well over 2 hours. And speaking of Belushi, he's one of those people who I think a lot of the real comedic talents, like people like John Candy and Dan Aykroyd, I feel like they're very underutilized, and they're the type of people who I think within this type of movie, if given the right dialogue, could have really saved this in many ways from the somewhat failed and awkward romantic instances and some of the more failed comedy moments. I feel like of those, especially this time, very well-known comedians who really, if on their A game, could have saved it within their segments, even if the movie still stayed uneven, if their segments will really kind of knock it out of the park, you can forgive those stretches that don't really quite work. The problem is I feel like they're overall underutilized and their segments don't really do enough to save it, and it just turns out to be a fairly underwhelming experience that, again, sounds and looks great. I think it's really just within the writing and the editing. I think those are the two failing points where it just doesn't quite click. It doesn't really become the type of movie it's trying to be. It fails a bit in that aspect. One thing continually throughout the majority of the movie that I thought was genuinely entertaining and funny. It starts off at the beginning of the movie. You have, and I think it's actually the actress who was the first person to die in Jaws. I think she reprised her role in the opening of the movie where you have a Japanese submarine come up and it comes up underneath her and she's attached to it, and it's just this funny opening sequence where you have this basically lost Japanese submarine and its crew, along with a Nazi observer, trying to find Los Angeles, trying to find Hollywood because they want to attack and bomb Hollywood and really try and crush the American spirit before they can really retaliate and rebuild and go after them after Pearl Harbor. And every segment with them was genuinely funny. I think every single segment with them worked very, very well, and as a big fan of Blazing Saddles, I was happy to see a couple reoccurring people, and one of the best parts is when they find this guy as they're dressed up as Christmas trees and they're trying to find Hollywood. They end up kidnapping him and bringing him back on their submarine, and a bunch of hilarious sequences continue with them throughout the whole movie. But it's, again, you open with them, and then after a few more story sequences, you come back to them for a little bit, and then you have a few more, and the majority of the movie plays out like that, and it's just that not everything meshes as well as it could have, and each segment is just, there's not a consistent quality. There's some segments that are great and some that are not. And yeah, 1941 overall, that's kind of the best description I can give as far as my experience with it. There are elements of it that hold up and are really, really good, but the overall package just kind of falls flat, and it feels overbloated, drags on a bit, and it feels like it couldn't quite accomplish the mission that it set for itself.